Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay, here with another video to talk a little bit about Nicki Minaj and the speech that she made in front of the United Nations today on behalf of Christians in Nigeria. What is she talking about? Well, a couple of weeks ago, she posted we made a video talking about the situation regarding Christians in Nigeria and Trump. Well, a couple of weeks ago, she posted about said situation, basically saying, you know, that her heart goes out to, and she supports completely the Trump administration doing something about the plight of Christians in Nigeria when Trump mentioned it. And today she made a speech talking about the importance of people in Nigeria being able to express their faith. She talked about being a native New Yorker. She talked about, um, how the music business exposed her to different walks of life, different people of different religions, and she was very vague in her descriptions. Needless to say, this new alignment with the Trump administration has a lot of her fans, the Barbs, who she thanked in the speech, very upset because uh, they feel that you know this is this is um this is inappropriate. This is a false allegiance with Donald Trump's regime because this comes seemingly out of nowhere. Lisa's saying good night. Good night, Lisa. This comes seemingly out of nowhere because, first of all, I have a couple of questions myself. What does Nicki Minaj have to do with Nigeria? She's not of Nigerian descent. She seemingly doesn't have any connections to Nigeria. She was a rap artist born in Trinidad and Tobago, raised in Queens. As far as you could be saying, well, maybe she's Christian. You know what I mean? Maybe that's her concern. She's concerned for her fellow Christians in Nigeria. Well, that could be one of the things, but I don't think Nicki Minaj has ever really professed strong Christianity, in my opinion. But what I think is going on here is a political maneuver on her part because Cardi B, who is her nemesis in the rap industry, we talked about their beef before. Um, is very anti-Trump, very against Trump, very democratic. She campaigned for Bernie Sanders. She campaigned for Joe Biden. She campaigned for Kamala, right? She campaigned for all these Democratic candidates that are against um, the Republicans. So this could be a way to rebrand herself, make herself more political, sort of like Amber Rose did, right? And making herself an ally of the Republican Party, being used as a tool for the Republican Party. But this is a weird hill to die on in a sense because she knows nothing about the conflict, or even if there is a conflict, because from my understanding, there is not. There is a situation with Islamic fundamentalism in the north of Nigeria. Because again, we talked a little bit about Nigeria, how Nigeria was formed. It basically was the borders are colonialist borders. The Europeans in the 1800s, there was a thing called the Scramble for Africa. And in the 1800s, a bunch of European nations got together in the German town of Berlin and basically divided up Africa. But Africa, prior to the arrival of the Europeans, had their own borders. They had their own tribal allegiances, their own tribal nations. And the North was a product of the Hausa civilization. The Hausa people had been involved in trade across the continent with the Arab North, with Arab and Berber North, which is predominantly Muslim, and through that, the soul trade. Through that, um, uh, Islam arrived in West Africa. You know, you had the Sokoto Caliphate, you had the Kanem-Borno Empire, things of that nature. You know, we all know Mali, Songhai, and Ghana. Ghana was like the first real big West African empire in the Middle Ages. And, you know, Muslims from the north would trade with uh, these African kingdoms, eventually converting them to Islam too. But in the south and southwest of Nigeria, it was primarily animistic, primarily belief in indigenous African religions. We talked before about the Yoruba religion, the Igbos, you know, in this the Yorubas in the southwest, the Igbos in the south, they had their own religions. But they didn't consider themselves necessarily the same people until the British arrived. And when the British arrived, they created this nation, Nigeria, of these various people that had nothing in common. When also the British arrived, they arrived with the religion of Christianity. It is often said that Christianity is not a colonialist religion in Africa, and people will point to like Egypt. You know, had an indigenous church. Egypt is one of the uh, um, apostolic churches established by Christ's followers. Mark went into Egypt, and then from there, the monk Fermentus spread the religion down further south into Ethiopia, which became the second Christian nation in history behind Armenia. But that's that part of Africa. In West Africa, Christianity did arrive with colonialism, with the coming of the Europeans, and the Igbos became Christian and they converted, you know, rather fanatically. And then later, in the 1960s, they tried to split off. But then with Islam, with the resurgence um, of Islam in the world, these Islamic revivalist movements, they obviously spread to Nigeria with funding from the Middle East. And you had the founding of Boko Haram, which was basically a Hausa movement to re-Islamicize Nigeria. And of course, in the places where Christians exist in these Hausa territories, Igbos exist in these Hausa territories, there was violence and kidnapping of Christian girls, as covered in the events in 2014, the whole Bring Back Our Girls campaign. But that's been going on for about 11 years now. Why is Nicki Minaj just talking about it now? Why is Trump just talking about it now? Well, the answer is something else is happening in West Africa. And that's something else is resources are being renationalized in several parts of Africa, right? There are regimes in Africa, such as that of Ibrahim Touré in the nation of Burkina Faso, African nations, particularly those that were under French colonialism, are getting together and kicking out the French and ending neocolonialism because while the Europeans left, they didn't entirely leave. They left their imprint on the country. and, you know, they're there to basically take back over. Muammar Gaddafi, before he was murdered by the United States in 2011, was trying to unite Africa under the Pan Africanist ideology. There have been several Pan Africanists in history. Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana comes to mind. Of course, Muammar Gaddafi. Of course, Thomas Sankara come to mind. Several African leaders from various African nations that have tried to reunite the continent and move colonialism out of the continent. Along with connecting people of African descent across the diaspora in the United States and the Caribbean. Marcus Garvey in the Caribbean and the United States come to mind. Eric Williams, the founder of Nicki's home nation, Trinidad, comes to mind as well. And Gaddafi was trying to do that, and that was one of the reasons why the United States, took him out, because he was trying to move away from the American dollar, like we see developing nations in the developing world starting to do now, particularly the BRICS nations. Brazil, Russia, India, and South Africa come to mind, trying to move away from American hegemony and colonialism. But of course, like with the murder of Gaddafi, America doesn't want that. So they're going to use people like Nicki Minaj that are useful idiots to try and say the Christians need to be saved, like the women needed to be saved in Afghanistan, right? Colonialists have always done this. The British did this back in the 1700s when they wanted to invade India. One of the things they said was, hey, these Indian women are subject to this brutal practice in the Hindu religion called sati, which is wife burning, because according to some of the Hindu scriptures, the god Christian women are saved. The goddess Shiva, the god Shiva, when he died, his wife Parvati burned herself alive. So Christian missionaries that were going to British Christian missionaries that were going to India were saying, listen, we got to go to India. We got to colonize India because the women need to be saved, right? Like David is saying, Christian women need to be saved. So they always need a pretext for war, right? But what really is going on is they're trying to stop Pan-Africanism from happening, as well as trying to trying to stop Africa's independence, trying to stop their anti-neocolonialist movement, and also trying to capitalize on the oil. What we're seeing right now in Venezuela is exactly the same thing. We talked about it yesterday with the Mexico video, where there's all this cartel stuff going on in Mexico. Likewise is going on in Venezuela, but Venezuela has something Mexico doesn't have, the same thing Nigeria has, and it's an OPEC nation. It's an oil nation. You know what I mean? So they're looking for new oil deposits. They're starting to run out in the Middle East. So they're looking for other places in the world that they can get oil from, and Nigeria happens to be one of those places. And for the longest time, I'm drawing back to the interview that Minister Farrakhan had with Mike Wallace, where he talked about, Mike Wallace says, Nigeria is one of the worst corrupt nations in the world. For the longest time, Americans have had this idea about Nigeria as being one of the worst, poorly run, corrupted nations in the entire world, right? And Trump would love to invade there, but he needed a reason and he needed a celebrity to push this agenda. And I believe Nicki Minaj is being used to push this agenda. You know what I mean? And this thing is are angering many of her fans because they they're of the belief that the uh, uh, they're of the belief. David says Nicki Minaj needs to relax. They're of the belief that Nicki Minaj is aligning herself with an administration that is anti-LGBT. I don't know about that because I mean, if you remember back to 2016, Trump did pledge to honor LGBTQism, LGBT, protect the LGBTQ community from Islamists, particularly ISIS. Remember the Pulse nightclub shooting in 2016, right around the time when he was first running for president. An Islamist, Omar Mateen, attacked an ISIS member, Omar Mateen, an Islamist, attacked a gay nightclub in Florida. And Trump, at that time, spearheaded by the likes of Milo Yiannopoulos, which was one of his advisors at the time, started this campaign that it was Trump that was going to protect the rights of the LGBTQ community. Of course, that conflicted with the evangelical community who was out to restrict the rights of the LGBTQ community, particularly the T part of the LGBTQ community, cutting down on trans rights and appointing uh, conservative judges to the Supreme Court that risk turning over Oberfeld, which is the landmark court case legalizing gay marriage nationally. So a lot of the barbs are upset about that, but you know, this is just a really weird cause for her to take up because it really has nothing to do with her. And a lot of people are speculating too that this is just for a pardon for her husband, who was a convicted PDF. So, but I don't know about that either. But, I mean, look, people, Trump pardoned Lil Wayne. So, I mean, and he's in the Young Money camp. So they're kind of maybe, Young Money is secretly MAGA, and they've been MAGA this whole time, as Amanda Seals has said. So, but is Nicki Minaj being used as a useful idiot to push the agenda of the Trump regime? Let me know, guys. Thank you, David and Lisa, for contributing. Love you guys. Peace.